Today we have with us once again Hilary Carter, SVP of Research at the Linux Foundation. Hilary, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Swab. It's great to be back.
It's my pleasure, and we are back with our yearly prediction video series. And of course, I'll ask about what kind of trend you see will be there in 2025. But before that, just quickly remind our viewers, what is Linux Foundation all about?
Wow, an exciting question to kick off with. The Linux Foundation is one of the world's most important and exciting organizations because of the work we do benefits all of humanity. It touches every person in the world who uses anything digital. We collaborate with people from countries from all over the world. What do? We host open source software, open hardware, open standards, and open data, and provide frameworks for mass collaboration and innovation in digital realms at scale. So that's an incredibly powerful role. And we steward it every single day. We're approximately 300 people from all over the world. Most of us are based in the United States. I happen to not be. I'm one of the Canadian employees of the organization. But we collaborate with employees from all over the world, member organizations from all over the world, developers from all over the world, all to make more secure, more robust, open source architecture that the world depends on.
You lead research at the Linux Foundation. Talk a bit about what is research at Linux Foundation? What kind of projects do folks work on?
So the research program at the LF, simply called LF Research, was founded in March of 2021 to explore open source collaboration and to provide empirical evidence for trends in open source across projects, within industries, and across a host of different frameworks to identify what open source is, what is its impact, what are the year-over-year trends in open source activity, and to have empirical data that would help decision-making across all of our project communities. So whether it relates to measuring the level of awareness of an open source project, the velocity of an open source project, the usage trends for open source software, the contribution trends for open source software, the proliferation of an open source program office within organizations of different sizes, trends across geographic lines like Europe, Japan, or looking at open source on a worldwide scale. For the past 4 years, we've created a massive repository of data around open source and have created essentially the definitive resource that's publicly available on open source insights within industries, across technology domains, within geographic regions, and at the touch point of areas that are cross industry and cross technology on issues like sustainability or developer relations or standards, things that touch all of us in all regions in different ways.
Thank you so much. Another interesting thing and another reason why I love working in the open source space is so much innovation is going on, which actually it's kind of, I like just slow down because as a journalist or influencer or analyst, you're always on your toes. So much is going on in the industry, new technologies, new open source projects keep coming up to transform the world. So I'm also kind of curious if you look at 2025 and if you look at, LF research, what kind of research you folks will be focusing on, or if you look at, what kind of research you feel will have a much bigger impact in 2025?
Great question, Swap. I think everyone's talking about AI. You mentioned DeepSeek earlier in the discussion, and it's very important that organizations, be they governments or enterprises, are making data-driven decisions using the very best empirical insights possible to guide their strategies. And that's where research is critical to support this effort of policy decision-making, of enterprise budget formation, of other types of collaborative decisions around technology. And so I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity to create new research that asks deeper questions than the studies we've done to date. We we presently have this library of insights that has very effectively made the case for why open source software is an incredibly powerful paradigm for technological innovation, for creating tremendous value for organizations. And as we look to 2025 and see a very different geopolitical landscape, it's important to take a step back and remember the facts, and to see what actual evidence shows, whether you're looking at something that may relate to a technological decision or perhaps a trade decision, the decision around something like tariffs. Let's look at the facts. Let's take a deep dive into what the data shows any given decision may make. And so that's why research is critical to this new technologically driven world environment. So I'm excited about what we can contribute to that decision making on a global scale today, to provide evidence for the impact of generative AI, to provide evidence for the impact of open source in the role of generative AI acceleration and global innovation and economic value, and what are all the benefits of open source. And to prove that empirically today is very important. To have factual information that people can trust is as important as code that people can trust. And so we're providing that trusted source of information around open source as it relates to governmental and enterprise decision making. And I'm really excited about continuing to contribute in that capacity.
Excellent, thank you. Now let's also talk about regulations, because there are a lot of industries which are heavily regulated. Healthcare is there, financial is there. Of course, in AI space, we need a lot of regulations. How are things going to look like in 2025 when it comes to regulations and the whole open source and industry in general?
I would say the entire global regulatory landscape right now is in a great state of change. We see a new administration coming into Washington, very quickly changing the landscape through executive orders that have been issued and will continue to be issued. How the new administration chooses to respond to existing regulation, and certainly we being Linux Foundation, have had to have a global view on regulation, not just what's coming out of the United States, but out of jurisdictions like the European Union on things like cybersecurity. So we tend to take a global view. There is a lot of regulatory change right now, but there's some things that we know to be true. The AI Act is basically in effect and will have a significant impact. How does that affect open source software communities? The Cyber Resilience Act is probably top of mind. It has only just recently been approved by the European Commission. The language has been finalized as late as, I think it was late October or early November, and it comes into force 3 years from when that language was finalized in 2027. And so it's incumbent upon the Linux Foundation to conduct our support programs in compliance with the requirements, particularly of the Cyber Resilience Act, but by no means ending there. We have a responsibility now that open source is language that is used inside regulation, to steward open source software in such a way as to be regulatorily compliant. And so we have a significant role to play in the regulatory landscape. Our stakeholders are incredibly concerned about regulation and its impact on their business, and how they engage with open source software projects will be a factor. How much support can we provide them in terms of lowering the costs of regulatory compliance through mutualization in our communities, through collaboration together within industries or on a global scale, so that the costs of regulatory compliance are naturally lowered And that's some of the value that foundations can provide in a new regulatory landscape. In terms of research, we are publishing 2 new reports early in 2025 that are specific to regulation, one of which concerns 3 projects hosted by the Linux Foundation: the Civil Infrastructure Platform, the Yocto Project, and the Zephyr Project, as 3 case examples of how open source project communities will be compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act, and how they were able to achieve best practices in open source software so as to have a regulatory compliant posture. So that's really exciting. What can we learn from these 3 project communities? How did they go about prioritizing cybersecurity best practices, the implementation of software bill of materials, and what can we learn from how they collaborate with one another in order to be regulatorily compliant? So that's one of our studies, which has a huge regulation focus, and hopefully will provide other project communities with pathways to shore up their own cybersecurity practices. And we've just closed a survey to measure awareness of the Cyber Resilience Act itself. What we found in a workshop that was conducted in Amsterdam, hosted by the Open Source Security Foundation and Linux Foundation Europe, was a workshop called the Stewards and Manufacturers Workshop. Stewards is one of the roles, if you will, identified by the CRA as our manufacturers. Each has different responsibilities and requirements for compliance. And when we got together to discuss the potential impact of the CRA, it was enlightening to learn that the level of awareness of what the requirements are is quite low. And on a global scale, for startups and smaller organizations, the CRA poses a significant type of barrier to entry for the European market in terms of both awareness and an organization's ability to be compliant with the CRA. So our early survey findings are revealing quite a low level of awareness, which validates the hypothesis that we discussed at our event in person. So research specific to regulation is something that you'll see coming from the Linux Foundation. And that's one of the roles that we can play in our effort to steward greater awareness of things like regulation, greater awareness of cybersecurity best practices, greater awareness of tools and resources that exist today, and improve our own contributions to help increase awareness through better information, better collaboration, more working groups around this subject. And I'm so excited that these are already underway, hosted by the Open Source Security Foundation.
Now let's talk about one of the biggest elephants in the room, which is AI, or we can, GenAI, LLMs, as we talked about, DeepSeek was also recently announced it's open source. What kind of things we can expect in the AI space in 2025?
Well, I think we can expect open source software to be in the headlines where AI innovation is concerned. And we're seeing that already with DeepSeek's emergence onto the global consciousness of tech companies and leaders worldwide, as a case in point of how any organization around the world can use open source models and can create highly competitive digital solutions using open source software, and create lower prices, greater competition. I think it's an incredible way to start the year. It's reverberating, honestly, the impact of open source on AI innovation. We did publish a study at the end of 2024 on, it was called Shaping the Future of Generative AI. And it was incredibly exciting because we have empirical data that shows how important openness is in created trusted AI systems. And I mean, 82% of a highly qualified audience of respondents said that open source was incredibly important to AI innovation. And 83% said that openness is going to be increasingly important over time, that we cannot create systems in silos. That's absolutely out of touch with regulation like Europe's AI Act, which insists on evaluating the risks within any AI system and how much harm any given system may do to society. So having a technology as critical to innovation and productivity and all the things that AI is able to do for organizations today, to have greater trust in those systems, greater transparency into the training models, into the weights and parameters, and to think quite critically about the types of data that those models are trained on, at least to have an understanding of what data is being used. I think also in 2025, we will see greater caution as it relates to the use of generative AI systems in terms of confidential information that is being fed into these systems, and inadvertently training systems on information that is not yet public. I think that's a very important consideration, and we'll start to see boundaries around the use of generative AI in terms of government use, in terms of use within the legal system, and enterprise AI use. I mean, if you think about, I want to have some help generating some content related to something that I know is being released 30 days from now that's not quite public, you're essentially giving away the information to these models. And so I think we will see greater guidance on appropriate use of generative AI as it relates to risk management. And I also see, therefore, a trend toward sovereign AI systems, sort of proprietary systems used only within an organization that are not public, that are trained to meet specific organizational needs and therefore not subject to leaking sensitive or confidential information outside of the boundaries of that model. So those sovereign systems will very likely be built using open source software, but will have parameters around their scope and accessibility by the training community broadly.
Now, can we also talk about, when we look at 2025, when we look at Linux Foundation or LF Research, what are some of the major milestones that are on the horizon this year?
Great question, Swap. 2025, I think one of the most exciting milestones we're going to look forward to is the 10th anniversary of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Last year, we saw the 10th anniversary of the Kubernetes project, and that was a thrilling milestone, and we were so excited to create a research study to measure the impact of Kubernetes at the intersection of its 10th anniversary. And so it would be equally exciting if we do some research with CNCF this year to understand the impact of a foundation, of a neutral home to host open source projects, and how do we measure the value of foundations. That's something that we want to better understand. I think it's good for us to know this. It's good for people who are unfamiliar with the work that neutral foundations do, and the value that we create. And if we can measure that empirically, I think that's going to provide some really beneficial data for our constituents. What was so exciting about Kubernetes Turns 10 is we were able to measure the impact measure the value for individual contributors, for startups, and for large enterprises, and engage with Kubernetes contributors. We had in a report that published in the middle of 2024, 30 quotes from open text answers to our empirical survey, which described mostly opportunities and positive impact of open source, but provided a mechanism for Kubernetes contributors to give feedback around what things they wanted to see improve. What were the challenges? Was it, kind of difficult to use or difficult to onboard to? So that collection of insight from Kubernetes contributors was incredible. And if we can harness that same type of insight at the anniversary of an organization like Cloud Native Computing Foundation or other foundations that are reaching milestone anniversaries, really understand the market awareness and perception of that foundation. We did a similar study for OpenSearch, which was published in Vienna at Open Source Summit Europe, which wasn't a milestone study, but it was an awareness and perception study of one of our projects. And it provided incredible data. Part of that data helped to inform AWS's decision to contribute OpenSearch to the Linux Foundation, because the research showed that when a project comes under a neutral governance model, it can enjoy exponential benefits, chief among them being the opportunity to further increase the number of open source contributors to that project, the speed of innovation, but also the opportunity to integrate more effectively with existing open source project communities and have greater cross collaboration. And I'll go back to the study that I was mentioning previously on CRA best practices and CRA readiness among Linux Foundation projects, 3 of them. And when we look at a project like Zephyr and a project like Yocto, for example, I'm going to spotlight those 2 out of the 3. What was incredible in the qualitative research process was to hear from the leaders of those projects openly state that simply having access to project leaders from SPDX, people like Kate Stewart, who co-authored the SPDX standard for software bill of materials 10 years ago. And those kinds of laws of physics coming together under, at Linux Foundation hosted events like Open Source Summit or KubeCon, and where people literally bump into one another and have those conversations and learn about projects and say, hey, we've got SPDX 3.0 coming. Oh, really? Tell me about that. What's new? What's exciting? You should get involved. That kind of interpersonal, physical coming together, having those conversations was very apparent for projects like Yocto, and Zephyr happens to be led by Kate. So it's no surprise that those projects are among our leading projects that we host at the LF that are going to be compliant with the requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act. So that's the value of foundations, Swap, and we need more empirical evidence of that nature to make that case. And that's what I'm looking forward to working on in 2025. The foundation model. Why is it powerful? Why is it effective? Why is it super valuable for scaling projects and scaling innovation?
Hilary, thank you so much for joining me today and talk about these research projects, and also, of course, looking forward all the trends. Thank you for great insights. And as usual, I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Swap. It's great to be here as always. We'll see you soon.